cat food is not made for the cat.
Yeah.
It's made for the little old lady who owns the cat.
Yeah.
Right? And so the way it's packaged and smell and everything is all there to make her or him, there are also old men who have cats, of course, convince the owner of the cat that the cat will be really happy with this.
Yeah. Welcome, Lars Peter. It's so good to have you. I was hoping that I could find you in a spot that you were in the Netherlands and that I could get you into one of our podcasts.
Fantastic. Great to be here.
Yes. And so maybe the first question to start with is, okay, who is Lars Peter? How would you like to introduce yourself?
I guess since we're talking about work, I guess I am... I don't like to say I'm a humanitarian. I think that's weird, but I worked in the humanitarian sector my entire career. So I'm probably a chaos pilot is probably the best way to put it.
Chaos pilot. I like that. Some people would have the subtitle Master of Disaster, but you would call it Chaos Pilot.
Yeah, I think it's more honest. Master is quite pretentious.
Nice. And so you say you've been working in your whole life in the humanitarian sector. What does that look like? I mean...
I started out as a volunteer in 1989. I went to work for a church in El Salvador, a politically very progressive church, as a peace guard. So we were basically human rights monitors, accompanying people who were under one kind of threat or another to make sure that they were safe. I was 20 at the time, and it was a very impactful experience, but it taught me that I really functioned quite well in messy situations. I think that was my main takeaway.
Yeah. Wow. And because you didn't grow up there, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Denmark, in different parts in Denmark and the mainland mainly.
So how did you get to go to El Salvador? I mean...
So my father he's a pastor in the Lutheran Church, and he was very involved in sort of the ecumenical side of things. So collaboration between different religions and different church directions. And he knew this church in El Salvador, and I had quite a wish to see the church really as a living part of community. Being Danish and Lutheran, it's quite cerebral and not always as plugged into reality as you find in some places in the global south, and I wanted to experience that.
Wow.
And I was also, and I think I still am, quite driven by a desire for social justice, to try to make the world a slightly better place than it is now, and that was also a strong motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I can imagine that has really shaped some of the choices you've made after that, those experiences.
Yeah, and it shaped me in different ways. I felt like a massive failure. Right. When you're 20, I think, you think you're immortal. So the idea of being scared from being in the middle of a civil war never crossed my mind, stupidly. Yeah. I'd never let my son go out the way I did. And secondly, you overestimate the impact you have on the world. So I felt like things that went wrong that were totally out of my control was my fault. And that was difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
Right?
Cool. Yeah, and so we met... basically, I think, is it 3 years ago now? Probably 2.5 years ago, as you were working with ACAPS, which you're doing right now, and looking into the next steps for that organization. Can you tell me a little bit, just in short? Okay, you've worked in different humanitarian roles. What does that look like, and where are you now?
Yeah, so I studied political science after my first experiences, and then quite quickly got involved in humanitarian action. And if you look at my career, it breaks quite nicely in two parts. For the first half, I worked as what you would call a broad spectrum humanitarian manager, right? So that's the guy you send out to an earthquake to assess and coordinate a situation and get things off the ground. So quite operational, a truck driver in disguise, if you want, right? So really moving things and working in very difficult situations, trying to really get things organized in a basic way. That's where the chaos pilot part comes in. So that was sort of the first part. And then about 15 years ago, I started something called ACAPS, which is basically business intelligence for the humanitarian community. Right? So we're like a B2B function.
Yeah.
Or an H2H function, as we actually call it, humanitarian to humanitarian, we try to enable humanitarian action by providing analysis of crises. So we scan around 180 crises across the world and put together some basic data around how they evolve, how bad they are, how big and how bad is the crisis. And we also do forward-looking analysis where we look at what might be happening for the next 6 to 9 months, for example.
Right. And how, I mean, my assumption now is there must have been information, but it wasn't there, or was it just organized badly? What was the reason for you to think we really need to start this?
It's two reasons, I would say. One, it's a quite specialized task, so you need a critical mass of analysts. We are today around 100 staff in total. And it's hard for organizations, individual organizations, to afford that. To have a critical mass of analysts to create that professional environment, you need to really dive deep into crisis. So there's like a handful of organizations like ACAPS that specialize in providing these services. And the second part is that we don't do operations, right? So we don't actually hand out cash or blankets or tennis socks or anything, right? We just write reports. And that means that we're not systematically pulled in one direction or another. If you're UNICEF or Save the Children, you have a natural and positive bias towards children.
Yeah.
If you are, say, UNHCR, you will work with refugees, but you don't have a mandate for internally displaced people.
Right.
So how do you holistically analyze a situation, and how do you decide how to prioritize between food, water, health, education? Right? That's a really difficult choice to make, and we try to provide a holistic analysis that can help organizations negotiate that very difficult equation.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and I can imagine that also within your work. I mean, ACAPS used to be part of NRC as an organization. That's where you started it, or basically entrepreneured within the organization, this new organization. How has that been for you? Because I basically came into the story when you tried to find, or basically have founded ACAPS as a separate organization within the Netherlands. What is that storyline? How does that look like?
Yeah, we started out, 15 years ago, we were 5 people. It was quite small. And we were hosted by Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC. And that really worked well for us, right? Because they had the whole setup. They had regional offices all over the globe, and we could piggyback on all of their capacity. They have maybe 12,000 employees, so it's a massive corporate. Yeah. And it was fantastic for us to be able to surf around inside that organization. And that enabled us to grow. And it worked perfectly until size, say, 30, 40 staff. We could still really handle it. But then as we grew and really scaled, and this was just about the time when COVID happened, we grew quite quickly to 140 staff. That's a different beast. Yeah. And I would say 2 things happened. One, the systems that we operated on inside Norwegian Refugee Council were not designed for what we do. We do knowledge production, they do big field operations. It's a very different risk profile, different staff, different everything. And so it became quite clunky, and we started to develop all sorts of patches to the system to be able to report financially and whatever, and that's not a stable situation to run on. It's also hard to maintain the sort of entrepreneurial culture inside a corporate entity that is quite different in its rhythm and culture. And this is no criticism of NRC, it's just 2 very different beasts. Yeah. Right? And then finally, that independence I spoke about, where we are able to see more holistically on things. There's a second side to that, and that is we don't have an operational footprint. Right. And so we can say things that it's difficult for large organizations to say. If you, for example, really upset the government in Ethiopia, you may not work in Ethiopia for much longer, right? Yeah. You may be PNG, right? Be persona non grata, you get kicked out. And as our reputation grew, we didn't want to create a risk for our host. Yeah. And we wanted to be able to speak as clearly and freely as we could. And that required also that we're independent. Yeah.
And because, I work in business mainly, yet at the same time, I really am very much involved with, is it humanitarian or purposeful businesses, thinking how can we use business also for the good of the country or of countries or this world. And I think you've come from a background of humanitarian rather than a business background, yet you are now into a business hub. You could have placed yourself anywhere in The Hague, but you chose partly to be in a tech hub in the center of The Hague. what do you feel is there to gain for humanitarian or NGO organizations from the business world and vice versa? What can we learn from one another and feed off on the stuff that we do?
So I think there are different pieces to it, right? On one side, we had the choice between going to the Humanity Hub and the Tech Hub, the Hague Tech. We chose the Hague Tech because we don't know you guys, right? And we don't need to hang out with humanitarians. I've done that my whole career, and I'm very happy to drink beers with them at night. But during the day, I'd like to have a cup of coffee with somebody who works with blockchain or with the food of the future or with synthetic data or something. Yeah. Right? It's inspiring and it's weird, and it is the skill set we need to understand as ACAPS to evolve and become the organization we need to be. Yeah. So that's on the environment we've chosen to plunk ourselves into. Yeah. Then there's the business model, and that is a bit more complicated. The humanitarian sector has quite a perverse incentive structure in the sense that who are our clients, if you want? Is it displaced populations or the donors who give us the money? Yeah. We sometimes call it upward accountability versus downward accountability. It's not a way I really like to speak about it, but it's a real challenge for us. I have a friend who says, really, all you are is the cat food industry. And the reason he says that is that cat food is not made for the cat. Yeah. It's made for the little old lady who owns the cat. Yeah. Right? And so the way it's packaged and smell and everything is all there to make her or him, there are also old men who have cats, of course, convince the owner of the cat that the cat will be really happy with this. Yeah. And it's, of course, a very crude way of speaking about humanitarian situations where people are suffering. But it's also a way of remembering that we don't naturally have a way of being held accountable for whether we deliver good services for the people we serve. So that disconnect between the people we serve and the people who give us the money, it creates a really difficult situation. It's often around how do you handle risk, actually.
Yeah. Wow. And I can imagine that what you say there is like placing yourself in a not normal situation, therefore in a tech hub where there's so many different, rather than saying, actually, it's not my ecosystem. It actually says, no, if I place myself there, I will broaden my ecosystem. I will learn new things, look at the same situation from a different angle, and I might even get different results or better results.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges we have as a humanitarian sector, and it hasn't become easier over the past couple of years, I'd say, right? No. We've seen quite a disruption of the consensus that we have operated on. Actually, exactly when I began my career in 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, the bipolar world disappeared, and end of history, we have operated for decades with a consensus around humanitarian action that is eroding day by day as we speak. Yeah. Right? We have the war in Ukraine, we have had the war in Gaza, we have the Middle East going on. And in all of those situations, you can see a deterioration of the respect for international humanitarian law, for humanitarian actors, a lack of accountability, and that is fundamentally reshaping the way we can work. At the same time, about half of the resources we have for humanitarian action have disappeared with the cut of US aid and the decrease in contribution from most of the major donors. So you can imagine operating in an industry where half the resources disappear overnight. Yeah. Right? And so in that situation, the most important thing for people like us is that we remember that we are not the victims here, right? Yeah. That it is actually people affected by this crisis that are the most important actors, and we have to play offense no matter how much we're cut down. Yeah. And the way to play offense is to find a new humanitarian paradigm. Yeah. And that's basically what we're trying to do. We're trying to transform ourselves into a next generation humanitarian actor, if you want. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Because I can imagine, I mean, part of what you're doing, and I think quite often people would make a separation between, you've got NGOs, and I'm probably myself guilty of this as well, sometimes thinking, okay, we've got NGOs, they basically spend money, and then there's businesses and they make money. But part of that is actually rethinking, what is an NGO? What is the product? Who are we serving? What is our client? And what is the best way we can serve that need and execute on that?
Exactly. What's our value proposition? What's the minimal viable product? How can you iterate on top of that product? How can you monetize it? Yeah. We monitor risk. We provide data that is useful for a number of private sector actors as well. And we are exploring how we can begin to monetize some of that. As it is now, we put all of our analysis out free of charge. We're like a public good in the humanitarian sector. And I think we should continue to do that for humanitarians. But why should big corporates not pay for the data they use?
Yeah.
And they do use it.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically thinking of how can we make sure that where there is value, actually there's also paid for value, and that it comes back into the business model that you are building.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you see in the next few years for ACAPS? And I know that you have been working on the roadmap towards what does the future look like for ACAPS as you've been establishing yourself here in The Hague. What is the big points sort of on the skyline?
Firstly, thank you for asking, because it's difficult to actually remember that. Because we chose to become independent in a situation where we at the same time lost half the money, and you have to build the new airplane while you're flying the old one, and that's expensive, and suddenly you only have half the money. And so it's been very challenging, and it's very easy to get caught up in financial systems and pay scales and whatever else you have to do when you become an independent organization, and forget about the purpose. I think we have to rethink the way we work, because if you take aside everything else and just look at AI and the way that reshapes our perception of what reality is, that alone requires us we do knowledge production. We have to fundamentally rethink what is our contribution here. Yeah. A lot of the work that our analysts have been doing so far can be done by an AI almost as good. Yeah. You do need to... We have decided that the final editorial control of whatever we put out lies in the hand of a human. And just talking about human in the loop is too weak. It doesn't shift any sort of accountability. But there's no doubt that AI can reshape internally how we work, and we can save a couple of $1 million on that in terms of staff time. And that staff time can then be put to other purposes. Mm. At the same time, we also operate in a setting where the humanitarian narrative, so the way we talk about humanitarian crisis, is being politicized and become or militarized, if you want. And if you take in particular Ukraine and Gaza, you will see there are highly disputed versions of what's actually going on. Yeah. What is actually the situation in Gaza? Is it a genocide, or is it legitimate self-defense from Israel? Yeah. What about Ukraine? You have seen massive disinformation from the Russians around what's happening. You've seen the role of the Red Cross being disputed. So we are headed towards a situation where we have we talk about a loss of a shared truth. Yeah. Right. So if we're in a post-truth world, and if AI enables us to produce bullshit at the cost of $0, how do we manage that? Yeah. And so we are talking about a shift from being analysts to narrative stewardship. So basically thinking about how we can enable others to work with evidence in a safe manner, or in a more legitimate manner, right? Because the challenge is not necessarily going to be to do analysis. A lot of that can be done. But how do you steward the process of working with that? How do you shape that narrative? And so we talk about narrative stewardship and try to figure out what does that look like for us. Yeah.
So rather than a human in the loop, you say, no, it's human in control. It's actually when it comes to what we publish as a company, what we publish to others, we want the human to be the responsible person.
Whatever comes out must be the result of an editorial choice of a human. Yeah. But how it's used and how it's reshaped and reformatted with all the tools that are there, we can't ignore that. No. So we have to get into that game and create a platform where we can exercise narrative stewardship and help actors come up with a principled humanitarian narrative. That's really what this is about.
Yeah. I was speaking with Beng Yella this morning, Beng from Cameroon, and I asked him, do you have a question for Lars Peter? As we always ask our guests to ask for a question for the next podcaster. And so, and he said, yeah, well, in thinking about all of this and seeing all these things happen, And his question was, is there like a doomsday scenario that you have lying around because you have all these data points on these big crises? Is there like an analysis model or something where you see, hey, wait a minute, now everything comes together and this basically it sort of becomes the perfect storm or doomsday, however you call it, because there is some prediction, like you said, 6 to 9 months looking ahead. And if so, what does that look like?
That's a terrible question. Well, it's a good question, but it's a terrible answer, I guess.
Yes.
If there's one thing I've learned from working with crisis for a couple of decades, it is that they're black swans. Right? So they are always what you think they're not. And so I don't think we can predict the scenarios. We can point to some risks, right? And I think massive population movements as a result of climate change or the wars we see or the economic disruption we see, for example, of the Middle East is very likely. Is that a doomsday scenario? If there's one thing I know about the world is that doomsday doesn't arrive to everybody at the same time. Right? I think the most vulnerable are hit the hardest and are hit very hard first. And that's what we see now with Iran, for example, and the whole Middle East crisis. It's a terrible situation for people in that region. The economic disruptions that we feel here in nice and cushy Netherlands or in even cushier Geneva is nothing compared to what's happening on the street in Pakistan or Somalia. And so whose doomsday are we talking about would probably be one thing, I would say. I am scared of AI. I think AI is an incredibly powerful technology, and it's more than a hammer in our hands. And so when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. And I'm not sure we know what the shipwreck looks like yet. And I'm not sure the people developing this technology care particularly much for whether the ship goes down or not. And that really concerns me, especially because if you think about AI in relation to humanitarian action, it's the worst possible use case. It's low frequency, high impact events affecting people that you can't make any money on. Nobody cares about the people affected by crisis. They fall through the cracks, and our job is to try to serve them the best we can. But it means that the models are not trained on data about them. And at the same time, you have bad actors who want to leverage this technology to mess up reality and make victims look like terrorists.
So I think that's a realistic, maybe not so happy answer to that question. But there is, I can understand, there's a real threat there of all the data that you see and you see what's happening, plus what you say, this distorted reality that more and more comes to the forefront. And the question is, for many of us, what can we still believe that is true?
Yeah. But I think the thing, whenever things go a bit dark, as what we are talking about now, I think for me the thing that always brings it back is that when you accompany people who are affected by crisis, you know that the last thing you tell them or the last thing you think is that these people are just victims. They're incredibly powerful, spunky, happy, suffering humans who teach you everything about life that's worth fighting for. And it's our bloody responsibility to do the best we can for them. And so we have to play offense no matter how difficult it is. And we have to call out all of the nonsense that's going on in the world right now and just get with the program.
Thank you. Thank you. That is very powerful. What would be one of the things I see right now is when I talk to younger people, and I'm considering myself a little bit older now because I do have some gray hairs. I see them quite often, they think about business or starting businesses, but quite often they do this within their mind, this, I would say, very materialistic view of what business looks like, so what it could bring them. And not so often yet I see this humanitarian part of that thinking, actually, I could leverage this into really making an impact in the world. As a person, let's assume there's this 20-year-old guy from Denmark that thinks, I want to make a change in the world. What would be the advice you would give to him today?
I'm trying to think about what that would be. I think I would start by saying to him that you're both incredibly lucky and incredibly unlucky. Because today you have when I was 20, it was by and large a blank page. Right? There was not a predefined biography for me.
Yeah.
And I could mess around and do weird things that I wanted to do and not feel a massive pressure or danger of falling behind the race. And it really strikes me when I look at my own kids and just young people today, my God, we've created a world where they have to super perform and life is a race. And so maybe just don't panic. I think is the first thing. Just don't panic.
Yeah.
And secondly, you're also incredibly lucky because we know so much more today than we did 30 years ago or 35 years ago. And you have opportunities, you have fantastic technology, you have knowledge, you have a schooling system that is significantly better than what I was messing around in. And so you have opportunities and then don't panic and then find your way.
Yeah.
And in finding that way, don't feel like when you fall or stumble that then you've lost. That's where the learning begins, right? If you at the age of 20 had a plan for your life, you'd end up with a very boring life.
Yeah.
Right? You need to figure out what this thing is. And so stumble around a bit. Don't be afraid of the rat race. You'll be okay. And go out and live some.
Do it.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, my my dad always said to me, he said, Jitse, until you're 40, it's internship. Just see it as a big internship. Learn as much as you can because those first 20 years, you'll just learn, see, taste, experience things. And then you'll find out, oh, actually, this is the thing I'm really good at. You don't have to figure it out at 22 knowing, oh, this is my life goal. You know what? Just see. Right. And as you'll do that, you'll find out the things, realizing, oh, that's something I really love, or that's the thing I feel really passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad used to just shake his head. He still does sometimes. Yeah.
Well, luckily, my dad, he shakes his head, but that's usually when I just make a dumb comment. Anyway, thanks so much, Lars Peter, for your time. And I think we could go on for hours talking about these subjects, and we definitely will do that at some time. But like you said, there's enough humanitarians we can drink beers with in the evenings as we can do here in The Hague. So thanks so much for your time, and thank you for your attention. And we'll see and speak soon.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.